Greetings, mortals! It is I, Remortis, coming at you with another guide to Baldur's Gate 3. This time, the master of quick strikes from the darkness, the Shadow Ninja.
I want to be ninja.
Or the Monk Rogue multiclass. Combining the mobility and martial arts of the monk with the cunning and expertise of the rogue creates a character combination that makes you truly feel like a ninja. We'll go over the monk class and its features it offers, as well as some of the layering changes, and briefly go over the rogues as well. We'll be looking into origin and racial options, starting stats, a leveling guide, and then we'll go over some key items to look out for. But fear not, there will be timestamps below to skip what is relevant to you. Let's get on with it, shall we? The monk. Individuals who harness the spirit within themselves in the form of Kai, or Ki, however you want to pronounce it, which can empower their strikes or allow them to perform various abilities. They're very agile and can dart around the battlefield, being able to help control and skirmish throughout a fight. At level 1, we'll be gaining 8 plus your constitution modifier to your hit points, and 5 plus your constitution modifier to HP for every level thereafter, making us a bit squishier compared to other martial classes. We can wield simple weapons and short swords, in addition to our fists. We also gain a few features right away at level 1, Unarmored Defense, which lets us add our Wisdom modifier in addition to your Dex modifier to your armor class, which can allow us to reach some decent levels of AC if we invest our stats properly. And we'll also gain 2 Ki at level 1, and 1 more Ki for each level we invest in Monk, which we can use to fuel our abilities. At level 1, we'll be starting with Flurry of Blows, which costs 1 Ki and allows us to punch a target twice as a bonus action. Additionally, we'll also get the ability Martial Arts, which is a passive feature that allows us to use our dexterity bonus in place of our strength for our damage, if our dexterity is higher. We'll also gain the feature called Martial Arts Bonus on Arm Strike. Whenever we attack with a monk weapon, which is any weapon that the monk is proficient with that isn't a two-handed weapon, you'll be granted the ability to punch a target with our fist as a bonus action at no Ki cost. So you need to determine if you really need that extra strike, since our Ki points are limited. At level 2, we'll move further while unarmored, and we gain a couple more Kai abilities. In Patient Defense, and we gain Step of the Wind, both dash and disengage. Patient Defense lets us take the dodge action as a bonus action, which causes all attacks against you to have disadvantage, and you also gain advantage on dexterity saving throws. This is the only way to get the dodge action in Baldur's Gate 3. Use this when you think your monk will be attacked or if you want to try and dodge tank a big enemy. May the dice be in your favor. Step in the Wind abilities are pretty neat to have, but for the cost of Kai, I don't think they're worth it, especially considering the rogue can do similar things with cunning action for free. But if you don't have the rogue levels, this can be useful for escaping or closing distances, though we'll get access to better gap closers later on. At level 3, we'll be able to get the ability to deflect missiles, which lets us use a reaction when shot by a ranged weapon to reduce its damage by 1d10 plus your dexterity plus your monk level. And if you reduce the damage completely, you can spend a Kai to throw it back, which is a really solid feature, though I wouldn't always throw an arrow back unless the enemy is close to death or if they are shooting a special arrow. Otherwise, it's kind of difficult for me to justify the Kai cost. We'll also pick our subclass here, in the Way of the Shadow, which grants a few spell-like abilities, though at a hefty cost of 2 Kai each. Pass Without a Trace, which gives your whole party plus 10 to stealth, which may let you sneak around easier. However, in my time of playing the game, I have never had to use this, because of the way stealth works in the game. Darkness is just like the spell granted to arcane casters, which is a very solid spell for this build, to help prevent people from seeing you and whatnot, kind of like a smokescreen. The only downside is that we don't innately have a way to see through the magical darkness. We also get the spell Dark Vision, which is absolutely useless, especially if you're playing a race that already has it. This doesn't let us see through our magical darkness either, so never use this spell. And lastly, we get Silence, which can be very useful against spellcasters or preventing certain enemies from calling for help or reinforcements. We'll also get the ability to hide as a bonus action, similar to the rogue, at no Kai cost. level 4, we get reduced fall damage, and we're granted an ASI or feat. Stats are always good to have. More dex and wisdom will do you great, being able to increase your damage output and your defenses. However, there are some great feats to choose from. Here are some key feats to look out for. The mobile feat, which lets us attack an enemy and be able to move away without prompting opportunity attacks, as well as increasing your movement distance and ignoring difficult terrain if you're dashing. The Tavern Brawler, which is revamped a bit in Baldur's Gate 3, which lets us add our strength modifier twice to any unarmored strike we make, as well as increase our strength or constitution by 1. There are a few ways to increase your strength in the game to take advantage of this, through potion, items, or even investing all of your stats into strength instead of dexterity, since there are ways to pump your dexterity too. And as long as your dexterity is higher than your strength, this should end up being pretty solid damage from just your fists. More on this later. And for this build, the Mage Slayer can be a really good choice, but for both being thematic and mechanically, granting us advantage against spells that are cast at point blank upon us, letting us get a reaction attack when somebody casts something next to us, and it also lets us impose disadvantage on enemy concentration saving throws if they're maintaining a spell. Some honorable mentions that I would like to add would be Athlete and Polearm Master, which can give this build different boosts in different ways. At level 5, we get extra attack and Stunning Strike, which can let us stun an enemy if they fail their con save. Many enemies and monsters have high constitution, especially fighters with their Indomitable trait, so pick your target carefully. Sometimes you can land a stun on that big boss or tough enemy. Those squishier targets and mages are probably your more preferred targets, and they are more likely to get hit by it. Shadow monks also get the ability Cloak of Shadows, which lets you cast invisibility as long as you're in darkness when you cast it, though it will break if you leave the shadows. At level 6, we get more movement while unarmored, and our fists count as magical weapons to overcome immunities. We'll also get Shadow Step, which is an amazing gap closer, and that will let you teleport from shadow to shadow and granting advantage on your next strike. You must be standing in shade or darkness to cast it as well, so keep that in mind. I typically use this to teleport to an enemy and use Stunning Strike on them with that advantage. The Monk is a solid class in Baldur's Gate 3, especially with the addition of many items to support the class. Its damage output is very solid and is quite mobile on the field as mentioned before, though it's still a relatively squishy class compared to other martials. Sadly, that wasn't addressed in Baldur's Gate 3. Though with patient defense, you'll be able to survive attacks by dodging them, hopefully. The Monk has a lot of sweet features too, but most of them use bonus actions, so you'll have to choose very carefully of how you wish to spend these bonus actions. This is where the Rogue comes into play. More specifically, the Thief, which will grant you an extra bonus action, enabling you to do even more sweet combos. Not to mention, it fits pretty thematically to fulfill that ninja fantasy. You'll also be given Cunning Action to conserve your key points by using the bonus action Dash and Disengage if you would need them, although you won't be able to get the free jump added to those, so keep that in mind. We'll also be able to make sneak attacks. While we can't trigger that damage with our fists, you can wield weapons as a monk and still be able to use your fists as bonus actions. For example, you can jump to your target with Shadow Step and use a sneak attack with that free advantage. You could also choose to run the Assassin as well, which can give you a strong Alpha Strike. I think the Thief is probably better overall for all that bonus action stuff. I do want to mention, however, that if you feel like your Shadow Monk is doing a little less damage than you'd like, perhaps you might consider respecing to be an Openhand Monk, as they have a few features that increase their damage on their unarmed strikes, but also have ways to further apply control with their flurry of blows, and have ways to restore their health and key points every so often. You should definitely check it out, and it might be worth consideration. You will be missing out on the Shadow Step ability, but there are other ways we can simulate that ability, with Misty Step, for example. For origin options, Astarion and the Dark Urge are excellent choices for this build combo. Without spoiling too much, Astarion gets an extra bonus action that fits very well with the build, while Dark Urge gets some unique items that synergize amazingly with this build too. And keep in mind, if you are playing Dark Urge as your main character, you still can get that item and give it to somebody else, say Astarion for example. Just something to think about. And obviously this is good for a custom character too. As for which specific races to choose, I'd suggest Drow, Dwergar, Lightfoot Halfling, and Half-Orc. The Drow will give us proficiency in a couple more finesse weapons, Perception. It also provides an advantage against charm and immunity to magical sleep effects, and will give us some neat free spells as we level up with Fairy Fire and Darkness. Even though Fairy Fire contradicts with most of the build, it can be useful to provide advantage or to find hidden foes. The Dwergar grant us more weapon proficiencies and a couple spells in Enlarge Reduce and Invisibility, with resistance to poison, and charm effects too. Halflings get the Lucky trait, which lets you re-roll ones and lets you have advantage on stealth checks, which can be quite relevant. Half-Orcs get Relentless Endurance, which can help you withstand a killing blow, which can sometimes keep you alive. It also increases your melee critical strike damage, which can be relevant considering we get advantage quite often with this build. Other honorable mentions are the Asmodeus Tiefling and the Deep Gnome, but ultimately, pick whatever race you like, because that's what really matters. And on to the stats. As a monk, we want to have high dexterity to increase our damage and armor class. Wisdom also increases our AC and the DC of our stunning strike. We also want to have Constitution for more HP. So for balance stats, we can go with 10 Strength, 16 Dexterity, 13 Constitution, 10 Intelligence, 16 Wisdom, and 10 Charisma. For a little bit more optimization, you can sacrifice your Intelligence to 8 and pump your Dexterity to 17. Now I know you're probably wondering why I'm leaving 2 stats at odd numbers, and there's reasons for that. Early in Act 1, you can find a way to increase your stat by 1. We'd pump up our Dexterity with that. And as for Constitution, well, there's a feat that we'll be picking up to pump this by 1, and we'll get into that later. But if you don't like to take that feat, go ahead and lower your Charisma and bring this to 14. You'll want to try to keep your Strength at 10, since there's a lot of jumping in this game, and as a melee class, you might need that to help get you to a certain target, if you don't have your other abilities available. Although, if this is your main character, then you might want to have Charisma higher, since you'll be talking to everyone. So really, it's completely up to you. And on to the leveling guide. For this build, I'll be making it for a custom origin. Though again, Astarion and Dark Urge make excellent choices for this build, especially the Dark Urge. Though considering most people are a little bit hesitant to play the Dark Urge, we'll just make this build for a custom origin. As for our starting class, it really depends on what role you need this character to fulfill in your party. If it feels like you're lacking a specialist in your group, then you may want to start level 1 as a rogue, grabbing expertise with sleight of hand and either perception or a conversation skill. You can also go with stealth if you plan to do a lot of alpha striking. Otherwise, for simplicity's sake, we'll just start as the monk for now. For race, I'll go with the drow, but again, choose whatever you'd like. For background, I like the idea of being an acolyte for this class combo for flavor reasons, since monks tend to be in some kind of cloister, and maybe you do have a religion. Unfortunately, we can't actually pick what deity we would like to worship, unless you're a cleric, but that's neither here nor there. Although, if you need this character to pick locks for you, and don't want to wait for your rogue level to do it, pick up Urchin or Charlatan. And then we'll be continuing with Monk until we hit to level 3, which will pick the Way of the Shadow subclass. And as for level 4, ASIs are again fantastic, but there are many sweet feats out there. I personally love Tavern Brawler, but it may take a while to have ways to increase your strength to take advantage of this feat. So for now, let's just go with Mobility. And we can always respec later, once we have some ways to increase our strength. And at level 5, that's when the Monk really starts to take off. That extra attack really helps out with damage. But we also get our Stunning Strike, which lets us potentially stun a foe, making it easier to attack and making that opponent skip their turn. At level 6, this is when you really start to feel the power of the Shadow Monk, as that extra teleport jump is already pretty sweet, but it also gives advantage too. Enjoy this. At level 7, this is where we can decide if we want to keep advancing in Monk or move on to Rogue. I personally think shifting to Rogue now is a good move for all the utility it will provide. We'll keep advancing in the Rogue until level 3, where we'll pick up Thief. Again, arguments can be made for the Assassin, but that extra bonus action will let us do a lot more things in the long run, especially considering since as you get higher, you might not be able to clear everything in your Alpha Strike. At level 10, this is where we can consider continuing with the monk again to get more ASI and movement, as well as invasion and stillness of mind. Ideally, we'll be advancing to 8 levels in monk and 4 levels in thief to grab the 2 more ASI and feats. You could also consider going ranger for Gloomstalker, which will let us get the dueling fighting style and a sweet free extra attack that can only be used on the first turn, but it also does extra damage. It also would give us more initiative. However, there are a lot of shadow interactions that somewhat overlap with the Shadow Monk features. You could completely forego the rogue part of this build in lieu of Gloomstalker, but that's for you to decide. A level 6 Shadow Monk, 3 Gloomstalker, and 3 Assassin would be a very potent ninja assassin that will have some explosive alpha strike damage. It depends if you have to move close to your target or not, as you might be wasting your initial alpha strike damage by using your actions for movement. Otherwise, I think the 8 Shadow Monk 4 Thief is the way to go here. And again, I can't stress this enough. Play the build how you want. It is your character after all. And if you have any other class variations to the build, by all means share below in the comments so we can make a bunch of ninjas together. With the build out of the way, let's get into some items and what to watch out for. There will be mild spoilers here, but I'll limit the details the best I can to avoid that. For some starting items you can find in the first couple hours of the game, check out these. Corlon's Grace, which can be purchased by Auntie Ethel in the Druid camp. She's next to the lady serving soup. She'll be inside our tent until you progress the story a little bit further, where she can then be found in the swamp. This is a pretty sweet staff. It probably lasts you most of the act. And speaking of the swamp, we can also find these sweet gloves in a stump, on a little island where you have to jump on the rocks to access. If you were to snoop around Kaga's room, you might find a quest that would put a marker where you can find these sweet gloves. They're not entirely amazing, but they can combine with all the other lightning charges effects commonly found in Act 1, and can result in some potent character buffs in the early game. Later in Act 1, make sure not to miss this sweet amulet, which can be found in the Underdark. Grimforge specifically. It can often be missed, as it's a little bit of a side path. It's near the ancient Forge waypoint, and it's in a chest on a little island that's surrounded by lava with a patrolling lava elemental, which can be easily avoided with enough time to snag the amulet. It gives us the ability to cast Shatter for free once per short rest, which can be really useful in situations that you'll need some AoE. And we can also use it to regenerate 2 Kai points, which resets on long rests. In what I call the Act 1.5, or the Mountain Pass, you can find these puppies from a merchant right near the beginning of the entrance. She also sells this chest piece that will pump up your dexterity even further, and will probably last you for a good portion of the game, especially with how cool it looks. In Act 2, you can find these solid gloves at Moonrise Towers, and these bad boys from Dammon, if you sided with the Tieflings in Act 1, and if he survives. After giving him Infernal Metal a few times, he'll reward you with these. And these are only some sample items you might want to look out for. There are plenty others, but I don't want to spoil everything for everybody. And on that note, the monk can do some solid damage thanks to Larian's sweet changes, although they are still very squishy. So use that darkness to your advantage. If you could get Devil's Sight some way, that'd be really awesome. But trying to dip Warlock into the mix may be cumbersome for your leveling. Try it out, might be worth it. Although maybe there might be an item that gives you Devil's Sight too. Hopefully there is, I haven't found it yet. I really hope you enjoyed this guide. I've been having too much fun playing the game since it launched, but now that I have a solid grasp of the mechanics, items, and changes in Baldur's Gate 3, I can finally start putting out some more of these guides, with much more accuracy and a lot less speculation. If you'd like to see other builds like this, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. And please tell me in the comments below what you'd like to see next. And before you say it, yes, I'll be making the Lock-It-In video. Don't worry, that's going to be the next one. Or you can also tell me how wrong I am in this build and what you prefer to do with your Shadow Ninja. Either way, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Farewell for now.